Okay, so would, yeah, so whoever came in newly, I think Caesar came in, and I don't know her name. So we'll find out names of folks who came in after everybody else was introduced. So we'll just kind of go around and independently tell us your name and what population you're working with.
My name is Caesar. César Accoussant, it's in French. Caesar. I'm from Togo, and I'll be working with the Togolese community in Pittsburgh.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in West Africa. Thanks to Ghana and
Thank you. Okay, and I think maybe, did you come in a little bit? I don't know if you introduced yourself.
No, she did.
She did, you did, okay. Who else?
I'm Brenda.
Did?
You did
Yeah.
not, did you? You didn't introduce yourself. I am a follower lady. She's sneaky. I am a follower lady. I am from Iraq.
Okay, hello.
I have been doing the leadership, I think, 1 month or 2 months ago.
Okay,
And so I'm new.
okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
And I'm Susan Wade. I'm from Iraq. I'm working with the Iraqi group.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and everybody else, yes, who's familiar. Okay. So the next stuff I'm going to talk about is about stuff that has to do with actually administering the surveys. So I think this is nice because we're getting kind of more into the brass tacks of what some of you are doing, and then even for those of you who are just running the groups, I think this is important for you to know because I guess it again speaks to all the ways we can like unintentionally bias things or impact the experience for other people through our presence in the administration of the survey. So there are lots of different ways to administer these surveys, right? You could either give the survey to a person and they can fill it out on their own because they can read it themselves. You could have to read it to them because they only speak in your native language and you must read it to them. Or they speak English, they can read an English one, there they are. So there's many different ways. So this face-to-face, some of the pros and cons of this kind of administration, right? You know, there's a good response rate, obviously, because you're right there doing it with them, so there's no like, they can't skip out on the survey because you're sitting there with them. It allows for some explanation and clear interpretation of wording with them, because you're there for them to say, well, what does that mean, or what do you mean by that, right? So you can clearly tell them what is meant by that. But also there's a really high chance of bias here because it's your interpretation of what that means. So it has to be, you have to be on the same page as the person who created that survey as to what that meant. Okay, and also anonymity is obviously lost. So when we do it by telephone, which is what some of you guys have to do, right, is calling people at home, it's more convenient for a lot of folks because they're at home or they have transportation, it's difficult for them to get to you. But it does provide more anonymity in this sense that because they're not seeing you, you know, sometimes just being face-to-face with somebody can impact their willingness to talk. I don't know if you find this guys to be true. Do you guys know about the concept of road rage? Yes, like in the United States, well, I mean, it happens everywhere, but like in the United States, people get very angry in their cars, you know, they'll yell and swear, and maybe you guys have done this yourselves, maybe I've done it, certainly, been angry at another driver. But I would never, if I was right next to somebody and they bumped into me, yell or swear at them. I wouldn't do that because that's not, you know, I'm a polite person. But this buffer of the car allows people to think that they can swear and say whatever they want because they're not in the same physical space as this other person, right? And it's sort of a similar thing for the phone. You know, the phone creates, you're not face to face, you're not seeing them. So if you're just talking to somebody, your willingness to communicate different things is changed by the fact that your communication is in a different way. So it's just something that you have to think about. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, or it doesn't mean it's a good thing. It's just a consideration to have, that when you're talking to somebody by phone, your conversation with them is different than the one you would have face-to-face. And then finally, a paper and pencil survey, so actually having the person fill it out themselves. So this is like ideal, really, because we want surveys to speak for themselves and for people to be able to fill it out on their own and make their own interpretations of questions. But as you can imagine, there are sometimes things that people do need to have explained to them. And so if they're just filling out by paper and pencil and they don't understand something, sometimes they'll just skip it. Sometimes they will answer it incorrectly and you know that it's incorrect. But the thing about a survey is we can't change it just because we know it's wrong. We have to take the person at what their word was of what they filled it out as. So you see why this can be a real problem, especially with this population. When we're talking about all these folks who are new to the United States, maybe new to English, you know, this is one of the biggest problems we have is people filling out questions and kind of answering them incorrectly, but we can't really change their data. Okay. So these are some tips about like what we want to see happening when we actually administer a survey to somebody else. So you want to really let the question speak for itself, and you want to provide as little interpretation of the question as possible. The questions are meant to elicit the answer without you having to add anything else to it. Now, some of the things you guys talked about was that you have to repeat it a few times, and where repetition is perfectly fine. One of the things that can become a problem is if you start to get people like, and I always saw my father doing this, you know, for those of you who came in late, my father's from Iran, and so sometimes, you know, he would give like metaphor and allegory for things to like explain how things work, and I think this is something that's very common when people are coming from a culture that's not so Westernly focused, is that we give metaphor and allegory and kind of like stories of things for examples of, but that can really affect a survey. If we give those kinds of interpretations, but that isn't necessarily what the survey was actually trying to get at. So we have to think about the way we would talk to somebody in regular life to explain something versus the way we would do it with a survey. Those should be different ways of doing this. As a group leader, the group leader should never administer a post-survey. I think what the exception here has been is that JF&CS is okay with the group leaders administering the pre-survey, and that's okay because that's seen as getting that baseline at the beginning of how things are going before the peer group starts. But in the end, we really don't want people's answers to be biased by having the group leader ask the questions. So what do you think the reasons for that are? Like how would, like let's say group until you guys ran a group, how might it impact the group members if you did the post-survey? What do you guys think? They might feel a little intimidated? Sure. Yeah, sure. And what does that intimidation lead to?
They might not say the right answer, you know, they might say something that is not really right.
Right, so they really want to please group until too. Because all of you, as I pointed out, have leader power in your communities. You're all seen as people who are significant and important in your communities. So the folks who are in your group who see you as a leader want to please you. So it's really important that you not administer a survey because they might bias the results in a way that is actually unintended and bad for you, right? They might say you did things more magically than ever imagined, but actually they're not doing that well, and they needed to be in the group more times, you know? So it can't just be good things that come from them, you know, kind of saying that the stars have all aligned at the end of the group. Because actually, if their needs have not been met and we're not aware that their needs haven't been met, JF&CS might make different programming choices, right? They might decide, oh, well, people only need the group one time. What if they actually need the group more than once? What if they need to be in this group multiple times to actually get the benefit of, you know, building the community and building out clear things? So we really need to ensure that we're doing as little as possible to impact the way we read it. So this social liking as a part of that, right? They really want you to like them, so they answer it in a way they think you'll be happy. This is what people do all the time. We all do this, you know? I mean, on a regular basis, I'm sure many times a week we've answered, but like, how, in the United States, people will ask you, how are you doing? And what do they want you to say?
Good.
Good, fine. Regardless of what your real answer is. And I must tell you that as a social worker, I often find it fun to kind of mess with people like that. Like, I have 3 small children, so if somebody asks me how I'm doing, I'm like, well, actually, the littlest one got up in the middle of the night, and I got no sleep, so, you know, I'm keeping it real, but I'm not doing fine, that's for sure. You know, because I kind of get sick of that personally, on a, like, I was born in the United States, I'm socialized to that, and it kind of annoys me on some other existential level, I'll say. But I just want to, like, what I'm saying here about the surveys, I guess, and I don't want to get so off track with my own examples, but, you know, we want to make sure that we're really reducing this bias as much as possible of the social liking piece. Okay, we want to avoid questions that are what we call double-barreled, where we ask 2 things at once. This is something that a lot of people can do when things are interpreted. And we don't mean to do it. We'll say something like, where did you go to high school and when did you graduate? So you ask somebody 2 questions. Very rarely do they answer both. They'll answer one, I went to Alderdice High School. But they don't tell you what year they graduated. So you overwhelm people when you double barrel them and ask them 2 things at once. So we have to be sure that when we're interpreting questions, we only ask singular questions. We ask, you know, for example, have you, you know, when we are interpreting this first question, you know, this question is about how the groups will benefit you. Do you think this will help you to make friends? And we've talked about this word friends. So we're going to say meet people in the community or meet other community members. We're going to use a different term there. Will it help you to get information? Will it help you to become more independent, right? We don't want to say all those things at once, because then they might just pick the last one. That's also something that happens. If people just choose the most recent thing they heard, they don't choose all the options. And, you know, for the questions in the back, you know, in the last 2 months, how often have you ever felt lonely? It's one question. We don't want to say, you know, how often have you felt lonely and what are you going to do about it? You know, we just want to make sure that when we interpret these things, we ask singular questions. You guys were nodding your heads furiously about something I said. Do you want to share anything?
No, I was, you know, with you actually, yeah, you know,
Yeah.
going step like one at a time.
Right, one step at a time.
Mhm.
Because one step at a time gets you the most accurate answers. And that's what we want here. We're aiming for accuracy.
And actually, if you notice, that's kind of why we separated that second and third question on the pre-survey, and I think it was Ruth that actually suggested that, because we kind of combined that initially
double
as
barreled.
one question.
Yeah.
What do you know how to access by yourself, and what do you know how to access with someone else? So we
Right.
separated them. Because
Yes.
people were not just kind of checking things off, but they were writing all kinds of things in it
Yeah.
that, you know, for us, we were trying to simplify it a little bit more so that we could better
Right.
use the, you know, the answers.
Exactly, right.
So,
We want to minimize, we want to take away those double questions as much as possible and ensure that what we're doing is just asking one question at a time so as to not overwhelm our clients, certainly. And then, you know, again, this like willingness to share, and I think, you know, what we're going to need is feedback from you guys. When we write this script that's going to be like what we want the interpreters to say before they administer the survey, we're going to need everybody, group leaders, interpreters, everybody to give us feedback on whether or not this script is going to work for your population. Because, I mean, you know, it's one of these things where I'd love for there to only be one script, but maybe we need many scripts. Maybe we need a different script for every population. That's going to be something we have to kind of play around with. So we're going to work on that with you guys, but we want that to be a document that you guys also understand is evolving. You know, that we will change that as we see how like, it needs to be shaped and formed. Okay, probing for a response. So things that you want to say to probe, like if somebody kind of doesn't answer, or you know, you have to repeat the question, like ways to do that properly. Sometimes people answer things inappropriately too, and you know it's not the right answer. So that can be a little bit, you know, you want to make sure that you're able to ask them in a kind and direct way. You know, I heard you just say that, you know, you'd really like to become more independent, but you also told me that you want to live with your children and you don't want to move out. So I just want to be sure that I understand you correctly, you know. And we want to be sure that, you know, if it's too brief, we ask them to elaborate so we can better understand why we're having this disconnect between the two questions. And then sometimes, and this is, again, cultural piece here, right? Sometimes silence is the best way to do that. To let the person then just like on their own. You know, if we just keep jumping at people, sometimes they won't give us all their information. But if we just take a step back and say, okay, you know, can you tell me, you know, which of these things do you need access to? I'm going to say, you know, you say transportation, and you only pause for 2 seconds, it might not be long enough time for them. They might need a pause of 5 seconds or 6 seconds. So that's something we have to think about too. Are we giving them enough time to feed back about that? Have you noticed anything with that in terms of phone, like, because sometimes phone calls is, and especially, you really notice that people are more mindful of pauses on a phone line than they are in a personal interaction. You know, you can read people's faces if they're going to answer or not, but on a phone call you don't know as well. So So that's something to be very mindful of as you're thinking about these different places where you might administer a survey. And then, oh wait, sorry, so, that's okay. And then just, yeah, thinking about like the controlling of things. So making sure you're really supervising anybody else who's going to administer these surveys and talking to them about the importance of these things. Because that quality control piece is really important. And I know, you know, all of our interpreters are here today, but there might be other people who call in to, you know, help you with interpretation or do interpretation for you, and it's going to be important that they have this information as well. Okay, so this is that piece about bias. And whether we mean to do it or not, we really impact people through the words that we say, the actions we take, our body language, our facial expressions, and our tone of voice. And I teach a communications class at California University, and one of the statistics I offer is that 70% of communication is nonverbal. 70%. So if you think about that, yes, interpretation is very important, but so much of what we say or feel or whatever is in our body language, in our tears, in the way our face looks, you know, so those are all important things you need to be reading too. So if somebody's telling you, I'm doing fine, I'm doing fine, I'm doing fine, but they look awful, that might be the kind of thing that you note at the back. Like this person, you know, I did this interview, you know, they told me everything was fine, but I am concerned because they had very, what we call flat affect. You know, they were not responding at all with their face. They were looking at the floor, they were disengaged. I had noticed they had lost 30 pounds since the last time I saw them. You know, there are a lot of things you can notice that can let you know somebody is doing much more poorly than they want to tell you they're doing. So that's important to think about too, is that as we do these kinds of surveys, and we're, you know, the whole purpose of this for JF&CS is to catch people who are, you know, again, like, some people are going to use this group and it's going to help them to connect to the community, and it's going to be all, you know, like, they've been doing okay, and this group's going to make them, like, flourish. And for other people, yeah, it's going to help them, but you're going to realize they need more than this. They need individual services, right? They need a case manager. They need somebody to help them with mental health or health problems that they're facing right now, with the adjustments in the United States, or with other biological, you know, health things that are going on with them. So it's really important that we're reading people and ensuring that we're getting them to the services that they need. Okay. So these are the kinds of bias that exist, and these are the most common ones we see, like in these kind of survey administrations, so that when people change their behavior because they know they're being watched. It's one of those things that happens when people are being video recorded, you know, people act very good for a while and then all of a sudden they kind of go to their regular behavior. I taught a marital and couples therapy class for a long time, and one of the most famous therapists in couples therapy is a man named John Gottman. And he became really famous because he had what was called the Love Lab, and it was an apartment that he would send kind of fighting couples to, and it had cameras all over the place. And he would say, like, I want you to basically live in this apartment for the weekend, and I kind of need to see how you guys are interacting. And he found, without fail, every single time couples went into this apartment, that after about 5 hours, they started really showing their stripes again. They would start fighting, they would start, you know, everything that had been happening that the therapist couldn't get them to talk about or do in person in those individual sessions, you know, the 1 hour he had with them, they finally started doing once they were in this apartment. And yes, at first, when they first got to the apartment, they were polite and prim and proper because they knew they were being watched. But eventually, just as humans, our guard falls off of that, and we just start acting like ourselves. So this is something to think about, though, because with these surveys, we're not spending a weekend with these individuals we're doing the surveys with, right? It's a very short period of time. So we have to think about how that might impact the process of doing a survey. Reporting bias is an intentional situation in which the patient selects that they have improved after the intervention because they feel that's appropriate. So they actually, you know, I was in the group, now I've improved. Right? Maybe they didn't actually, but that's what the feeling is. I've been in this group for 8 weeks, I've done this group, you know, 2 times, I've done this group 3 times, I should be better. So that's a kind of bias that can exist. And then, you know, regression is one where, you know, again, you see sort of somebody at the very extreme kind of come back down towards the middle. And I think that's less what we're gonna see in these peer groups. What we're gonna see is more attention, reporting, and then this extreme bias when one, occurs when the practitioner is present during the taking of these things. So this is when the peer group leader's presence would impact the surveys. And we've talked about that, and it sounds to me like that's not really happening in these postal surveys at all at this point. So I'd say that's kind of like a moot thing, but just something to make sure you understand really can impact the results of surveys. Okay, so these are the ways we're gonna, in the peer groups, when we talk about this, these are the steps we're taking, these 4 steps to reduce this kind of bias. So the first one's called blinding, the second one's standardization, the third one is the removal, which we've talked about, the peer leaders not being there, and the fourth is fair diligence. So each of these, we're near the end of the slides now, just so you know, so you're very excited about that. Okay, so the first one, blinding. We want to remove the relationship aspect between the assessor and the respondent. And how we're going to make this happen is to tell the group leaders that, tell the participants of the group leaders do not have access to the results. So that's pretty important, right? To say to them, hey, you're going to fill out the survey, it's going to let us know how you're doing at the beginning of things, and at the end of the group, you're going to fill it out again. The group leader is never going to see your individual survey. We'll tell them how the group did as a whole, but they will never see your individual results. That's very significant to people, because that removes a lot of bias. It lets them know that they can be honest in what they're going to tell you, and it protects their confidentiality. And those are 2 really important things in people being honest about how effective a group really was for them. Okay? So the next one, the standardization. So this is the one with where I was talking about how the top of the survey is, I think something we need to add is, how was it administered, right? Was it self-administered? Was it interpreter administered? Or was it family member / interpreter administered, right? Because I think all those layers are important to our understanding of how much bias might be in this survey. Okay? The next one. Taking the clinicians out. So again, no group leaders are going to be involved in the post surveys. I think JF and CS, and from my research standpoint too, I think it's fine for the group leaders to be involved in the pre-survey. Because it's getting an idea of where you're at the beginning, and I think that's okay for the peer leaders to assist in that. But I think it has to be very clear, even if you help with that pre-survey, because one of the things that could happen is they think that if you're involved in the pre-survey, you'll also be involved in the post. And you want to make it clear that just because you're helping with this pre-one, at the end, you're not going to help with the other one, and making that a clear process too. And then the last thing, again, the fair diligence piece in informing the research subject, the peers here, of the purpose and the objectives. So letting them know the script that I'm talking about, letting them know the purpose of us doing these surveys and the outcomes, and that this is the kind of thing, that should be done by an interpreter, not by the group leader, or it should be done by Simone. It should be done by an agent of JF and CS in that way, that says, hey, we want to make sure that you're getting everything you need out of this group. We want to make sure we're meeting your needs, and that we're helping you to acclimate to Allegheny County. And this survey is going to allow us to know that you're connecting with other people, that you feel like there are people you can connect with when you're worried about something, that there are people you trust, and that those are important things for us, sensing that you've built this sense of community here. And I think that's it for that stuff. So the last thing I want to talk about is this missing data piece. So when things aren't filled out, there are ways for us, through computer programs, statistically, to actually fill in missing data. So we don't need you to do it. If somebody doesn't fill out part of a survey, and we can't get them to fill it out, like we call them, they don't answer, they're kind of lost, right? We can never get them to fill out the survey. That's okay. Leave it as is. We would rather know that we are missing that data than have something not real or pretend or something else put in there, okay? Missing data isn't really a problem for us in that regard. We want you to do as much as you can to get these surveys filled out in their, as fully as possible, but everyone's human. There are going to be people who skip a question, or you forget to ask one, or something like that happens, and we'll handle that later in the in the analysis of the data in the computer programs. But I just want to make it clear that we never want to guess what someone was thinking. Don't fill it out unless you actually got the information from them. Okay. And then I think that's it for now. I think we're going to what we were gonna do is start doing practicing, and I think, hopefully Les will go back with coffee soon, and we can like have some coffee time. But maybe we could start on it now, and do some of this administering to one another. So I think everybody has the English language one in front of them. So what I'd like to see is, especially for this first page, with the pre-questions here, I'd like to see, I'm gonna walk around and kind of listen to you, to see what's the best way you think to ask that question and get the feedback from somebody, and what you do to probe and get sort of that feedback. So what I want you to do is focus on how you would ask these questions to one another, but also imagining that this is a client, that this is one of the people in the peer groups, and how you're gonna ask this to bias them least of all. So grab a partner, whoever's sitting right next to you. It's okay if it's from someone from your own community, that's fine. We're gonna switch around. Once we have coffee, we'll get up and switch around. And but I'm gonna come around and listen to all of you so I can hear you. So do it first in English so I know what you're saying. And then you can also do it in your own native languages, and I think that'll be helpful too. Okay.
Are we doing it in English or in?
Do it in English so I know what you're saying, so I can listen in a little bit, but then, yes, we'll also do some time in your own languages.
Aussie.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think we have, you want me to go first?